Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much. I didn't plan to spend New Year's Eve at a cabin in the woods, especially not with people I barely knew. But when my friend Sam insisted I join his group for a weekend getaway, I gave in. "It'll be fun," he had said. "No pressure, just good vibes." What he failed to mention was that I'd be stuck in the middle of nowhere with 4 strangers. The cabin itself was charming enough, rustic, 2 stories, surrounded by a dense forest that looked serene during the day and menacing as soon as the sun set. The group consisted of Sam, his girlfriend Lily, a couple named Marcus and Jen, and a guy named Ryan who kept mostly to himself. I felt out of place from the beginning, the odd one out in this group of close-knit friends and lovers. It started as a typical evening. We grilled some food, cracked open beers, and played board games by the fireplace. The energy was light, with Marcus cracking jokes and Lily DJing from her phone. By 11 p.m., the temperature dropped significantly, and the fire was roaring. We started a game of Never Have I Ever, and that's when the cracks began to show. "Never have I ever cheated on someone," Lily said, staring pointedly at Sam. He raised an eyebrow but didn't drink. Marcus, however, took a sip, earning a sharp look from Jen. "Seriously?" Jen asked, her voice tense. "You're just going to admit that here?" "It was years ago," Marcus said defensively. "Before I met you." The air grew awkward, and I excused myself to step outside. The cold night air bit into my skin as I stood on the porch, staring at the woods. The stars were unusually bright, and for a moment, I felt at peace. Then I heard it, a faint rustling in the bushes. I squinted into the darkness but saw nothing. Telling myself it was just an animal, I went back inside. The tension in the cabin had eased somewhat when I returned. The group had moved on to discussing their resolutions. Ryan, who had been quiet all evening, finally spoke up. "My resolution is to face my fears," he said, his voice low and steady. "You know, do the things that scare me the most." There was something unsettling about the way he said it, but no one else seemed to notice. The clock struck midnight, and we all shouted, "Happy New Year!" Glasses clinked, and laughter filled the room. For a brief moment, it felt like any other celebration. But then, Lily noticed her phone was missing. She swore she'd left it on the coffee table, but it was nowhere to be found. We searched the cabin, turning over couch cushions and checking under furniture. The phone was gone. Sam tried calling it, but it went straight to voicemail. "Maybe you dropped it outside?" Marcus suggested. "I didn't go outside," Lily said, her voice tinged with frustration. "Let's not make a big deal out of this," Sam said, trying to defuse the situation. "It'll turn up." But the mood had shifted. We decided to call it a night, and everyone headed to their rooms. I shared a room with Ryan, who was already lying in bed when I came in. He had his back to me, his breathing steady. I climbed into my bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The rustling I'd heard earlier replayed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of footsteps. They were soft, almost imperceptible, but definitely there. I sat up and listened. The footsteps grew louder then stopped. I glanced at Ryan. He was still in bed, unmoving. Curiosity got the better of me, and I slipped out of bed. I opened the door quietly and peered into the hallway. It was empty. The cabin was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards. I walked down the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. In the living room, the fireplace had burned out, and the room was cloaked in darkness. I turned on a lamp and froze. A knife was lying on the coffee table, its blade glinting under the dim light. It wasn't there earlier. What the hell? I whispered to myself. I heard a creak behind me and spun around. Ryan was standing at the bottom of the stairs, his face unreadable. Couldn't sleep? He asked, his voice calm. I thought I heard something, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He nodded and walked past me, picking up the knife. This yours? No, I said quickly. I've never seen it before. Ryan stared at the knife for a moment before setting it back down. Strange, he said. We should probably lock the doors, just in case. I nodded, and we went around the cabin, checking the locks. Everything seemed secure, but the unease lingered. Ryan went back upstairs, and I stayed in the living room, unable to shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, Lily's phone was found in the woods, shattered beyond repair. She was hysterical, convinced someone had taken it and thrown it out there. Sam tried to calm her down, but she wasn't having it. Someone here is messing with us, she said, her eyes darting between us. That's ridiculous, Marcus said. Why would any of us do that? I don't know, Lily snapped. But this isn't normal. The day passed uneventfully, but the tension was palpable. No one wanted to admit it, but we were all on edge. As night fell, we decided to stick together in the living room, reasoning that there was safety in numbers. We played card games and tried to keep the mood light, but it was clear that no one was having fun. Around midnight, the power went out. The cabin was plunged into darkness, and the only light came from the flashlight on my phone. We gathered in the living room, huddled together as the wind howled outside. It's probably just a storm, Sam said, trying to sound confident. Or someone cut the power, Lily muttered. Don't start, Sam said, his patience wearing thin. Then we heard it, a loud thud from upstairs. We all froze, our eyes darting toward the ceiling. Another thud, followed by the sound of something heavy being dragged. What the hell is that? Jen whispered, clutching Marcus's arm. Stay here, Sam said, grabbing the flashlight and heading for the stairs. Wait, I said. You shouldn't go alone. Reluctantly, I followed him. The stairs creaked under our weight as we ascended, the flashlight's beam cutting through the darkness. We reached the top and listened. The sound was coming from the room Ryan and I shared. Sam pushed the door open, and the flashlight revealed a horrifying sight. Ryan was standing over a bloodied figure, his hands gripping a knife. The body on the floor was Marcus, his lifeless eyes staring up at the ceiling. What the hell are you doing? Sam shouted. Ryan looked up, his expression eerily calm. Facing my fears, he said. Sam lunged at him, but Ryan was quick. He slashed at Sam, catching him on the arm. I grabbed a lamp from the nightstand and swung it at Ryan, hitting him in the head. He stumbled but didn't go down. Sam tackled him, and together we managed to pin him to the ground. The others had come upstairs by then, and Jen screamed when she saw Marcus. Lily called the police, and we held Ryan down until they arrived. He didn't resist, didn't say a word as they handcuffed him and led him away. His calmness was perhaps the most chilling part of all. As the police took statements and cordoned off the cabin, I couldn't stop thinking about Ryan's words. Facing my fears. What kind of fear drives a man to kill? And why Marcus? Questions swirled in my mind, but answers were scarce. Ryan was arrested and charged with murder. The rest of us went our separate ways, scarred by the events of that night. I haven't spoken to any of them since, and I doubt I ever will. New Year's Eve will never be the same for me. The sound of fireworks still makes me jump, reminding me of that night in the cabin and the horror we lived through. I wasn't supposed to be at that New Year's party. It was meant to be a quiet evening at home with a bottle of cheap wine and a cheesy countdown show. But my best friend, Megan, had other plans. She was insistent, borderline obnoxious, about dragging me out of my rut. You can't spend another New Year alone, Danny, she had said, pulling me out of my comfort zone. You need this, The party was at a sprawling mansion owned by Megan's coworker, Alex. It was one of those places you only see in movies: high ceilings, marble floors, and a backyard that looked more like a luxury resort. I felt out of place immediately. Everyone was dressed to impress, and I was wearing my only decent blazer, which I'd bought secondhand. The atmosphere was electric. Music thumped loudly, laughter and conversation filled the air, and the scent of expensive perfume mingled with that of freshly catered food. Megan disappeared into the crowd almost instantly, leaving me to fend for myself. I stuck close to the drink table, nursing a whiskey and trying to look less awkward than I felt. That's when I noticed him. He was standing near the edge of the room, partially obscured by the shadows. He wasn't mingling, wasn't drinking. Just watching. He was tall, with an angular face and dark, piercing eyes. Something about him made me uneasy, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Maybe it was the way his gaze lingered a little too long on people, or how he seemed entirely detached from the revelry around him. "That's Victor," someone said, breaking my train of thought. I turned to see a woman, her lips painted a striking red, nodding toward the man. Alex's brother. Bit of a recluse, but harmless. I nodded, though her words didn't ease my unease. Something about Victor felt off. I tried to shake it off and enjoy the party, but my eyes kept drifting back to him. The evening progressed, and as midnight approached, the energy in the room became almost frenetic. People were dancing, toasting, and counting down the minutes to the new year. I found myself outside on the balcony, seeking a moment of quiet. The cold air was refreshing, and I could hear the muffled sounds of the party behind me. I wasn't alone for long. Victor stepped out onto the balcony, his presence as unsettling as ever. He leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on the dark expanse of the yard below. "Not a fan of parties?" I asked, more out of politeness than curiosity. He glanced at me, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Not particularly." We stood in silence for a moment, the tension palpable. Then he spoke again. "Do you ever feel like people are too distracted?" he asked, his voice low but clear. "Like they're so caught up in their little worlds, they don't notice what's happening around them." The question caught me off guard. "I guess. But isn't that the point of a party? To forget, even for a little while?" He didn't respond, just continued staring into the darkness. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. I muttered an excuse and went back inside. The countdown began shortly after, and the room erupted in cheers as the clock struck midnight. Confetti rained down, and champagne glasses clinked. I tried to get back into the spirit of the evening, but a nagging sense of unease lingered. It wasn't until the scream echoed through the mansion that the festivities came to a screeching halt. Everyone froze, their laughter and chatter dying instantly. The scream had come from upstairs. A few people exchanged nervous glances, while others murmured in confusion. Alex, the host, stepped forward, his face pale. "Stay here," he said firmly before heading toward the stairs. Megan and I exchanged a look, and despite his instructions, we followed him. A small group of curious partygoers trailed behind us. The upstairs hallway was dimly lit, the air thick with an eerie stillness. The scream had come from one of the guest rooms. Alex pushed the door open, and what we saw made my stomach churn. A woman was lying on the floor, her dress soaked in blood. Her eyes were wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. A knife lay nearby, its blade gleaming ominously in the dim light. The room erupted into chaos as people screamed and backed away. "Call the police!" Alex shouted, his voice shaking. Someone fumbled with their phone, dialing frantically. I stepped back, my mind racing. Who was she? I didn't recognize her from the party, but that wasn't surprising given how many people were there. What was more troubling was the fact that Victor was nowhere to be seen. The police arrived quickly, their flashing lights illuminating the mansion's grand facade. The officers cordoned off the room and began questioning everyone. It was a surreal experience, sitting in that opulent living room with a murder investigation unfolding around us. When it was my turn to be questioned, I told them about Victor and our conversation on the balcony. The officer's expression hardened as I described his behavior. "Do you know where he is now?" the officer asked. I shook my head. "I haven't seen him since the countdown." The next few hours were a blur. The police searched the mansion but found no sign of Victor. The guests were eventually allowed to leave, though we were all told to remain available for further questioning. Megan drove me home, both of us too shaken to say much. Over the next few days, the news was everywhere. The woman was identified as one of the catering staff, but no one seemed to know why she had been targeted. Victor was officially declared a person of interest, but he had vanished without a trace. I couldn't stop thinking about his words on the balcony, about people being too distracted to notice what's happening around them. It felt like a clue, though to what I couldn't say. Weeks turned into months, and the case remained unsolved. Victor became a ghost, a name whispered in hushed tones but never seen. The mansion's party ceased, its grandeur overshadowed by the tragedy that had occurred within its walls. Life went on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was still out there, watching, waiting. New Year's Eve became a time of unease for me, a reminder of how quickly celebration can turn to horror. And every time I hear the distant sound of fireworks, I wonder if he's planning his next move. The clock was ticking down to midnight, and the city was alive with anticipation. Streets glowed with string lights, and people crowded into bars, clubs, and rooftop parties. I had somehow found myself at the New Year's Eve gala at the Belmont Hotel, an event I never would have attended if not for my boss, Diane. She had insisted that our entire team show up, calling it a networking opportunity. In reality, it was her excuse to flaunt her connections. The Belmont was as grand as you'd imagine, chandeliers glittering like constellations, servers gliding through the crowd with trays of champagne, and an enormous clock mounted in the center of the ballroom, counting down the seconds to the new year. I tugged at the sleeves of my rented suit, trying not to feel completely out of place. The crowd was a mix of socialites, executives, and influencers, people who seemed born to belong in this kind of extravagance. I was none of those things. I worked in the marketing department of a mid-tier company, barely making enough to cover rent. But Diane had a way of making her expectations feel like obligations, so here I was, nursing a gin and tonic and counting the minutes until I could leave. "Not your scene?" a voice said beside me. I turned to see a woman with short black hair and sharp, discerning eyes. She was dressed in a sleek black dress, understated compared to the glittering gowns around us, but somehow more striking. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, managing a weak smile. She shrugged. "You've been standing here for 20 minutes, staring at the clock like it owes you money." I chuckled despite myself. "Guilty as charged." "I'm Danny." "Laura," she said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm, confident. "So, what brings you to this palace of pretense?" "Work," I said, gesturing vaguely toward Diane, who was holding court in a circle of admirers. "You." "Curiosity," she said. "I've heard about these parties for years but never had a reason to come. Thought I'd see what the fuss was about." And she took a sip of her drink. "Overrated. But at least the drinks are strong." We fell into easy conversation, trading observations about the people around us and sharing stories about our vastly different lives. She worked in event planning, which explained her keen eye for detail. Talking to her made the party almost bearable. The countdown to midnight began, and the crowd grew louder, their voices merging into a chaotic chant. Laura and I exchanged a look, both amused and slightly exasperated by the spectacle. As the final seconds ticked away, everyone turned their attention to the grand clock. 10, 9, 8. The room was electric, the anticipation palpable. But just as the crowd shouted, 3, 2, the lights flickered and went out. Gasps and nervous laughter rippled through the room. For a moment, everything was silent except for the murmurs of confusion. Then the emergency lights kicked in, casting the ballroom in an eerie, pale glow. "Well, that's one way to ring in the new year," Laura said, her tone light but her eyes scanning the room. Before I could respond, a piercing scream shattered the uneasy calm. It came from the far side of the ballroom, near the entrance to the kitchens. People turned in unison, a wave of fear sweeping through the crowd. "Stay here," Laura said, her voice suddenly serious. She set down her drink and started toward the commotion. "Wait, what?" "No way," I said, following her. As we pushed through the throng of guests, the scene came into view. A man was lying on the marble floor, blood pooling beneath him. His tuxedo was immaculate except for the crimson stains spreading across his chest. A woman knelt beside him, her hands trembling as she pressed a napkin against the wound. "He's been stabbed," someone shouted. The crowd recoiled, people backing away as if the violence might be contagious. Laura crouched beside the man, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the panic around her. "He's still alive," she said, her fingers pressing against his neck to check for a pulse. "But he needs help now. Where are the paramedics? Someone call 911! Another voice yelled, though I'd already seen at least 3 people on their phones, frantically trying to get through. The room felt like it was closing in, the air heavy with fear and the metallic tang of blood. I stood frozen, unsure of what to do, until Laura looked up at me. "Danny, help me move him. We need to stop the bleeding." Together, we managed to roll the man onto his side, using a tablecloth someone handed us to apply pressure to the wound. His breaths were shallow, his face pale. "Who did this?" someone whispered, a question that hung in the air like a cloud. The answer came sooner than any of us expected. A figure emerged from the crowd, their movements deliberate and their face obscured by a scarf. They held a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. "Nobody move," the figure said, their voice low but commanding. The crowd parted, fear overriding any sense of defiance. The attacker's eyes scanned the room, lingering on Laura and me. "Drop the knife," Laura said, her voice steady. The figure tilted their head, almost as if amused. "Why would I do that? You're all so predictable. So blind. This doesn't have to get worse," Laura said, her tone firm but calm. "Let him go. Walk away now, and no one else gets hurt." "You don't understand," the attacker said, taking a step closer. "This is just the beginning." What happened next was a blur. The attacker lunged, and chaos erupted. People screamed and scattered, furniture toppled, and glasses shattered. Laura grabbed a chair and swung it at the attacker, giving me enough time to pull the injured man further away. A group of guests managed to tackle the attacker, wresting the knife from their grip. By the time security arrived, the figure was restrained, their scarf torn away to reveal a face I didn't recognize. The rest of the night was a haze of police interviews and flashing lights. The injured man was taken to the hospital, and the attacker was led away in handcuffs, their cryptic words still ringing in my ears. "This is just the beginning." I found Laura outside, sitting on the steps of the Belmont, her dress stained with blood and her expression unreadable. I sat beside her, unsure of what to say. "Hell of a new year," she finally said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You're telling me," I replied. We sat in silence for a while, the distant sound of fireworks punctuating the night. The city was still celebrating, oblivious to the nightmare that had unfolded within the walls of the Belmont. "What do you think they meant?" I asked. "This is just the beginning?" Laura's gaze was distant, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. "I don't know," she said finally. "But I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of this." And as the first day of the new year dawned, I couldn't shake the sense that she was right.